Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Yes, less than a week until Election Day now. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for you today. And Jim, we have good news coming just a little while ago from the U.S. Supreme Court. We had kind of documented the back and forth here about what's happening in Virginia. Glenn Youngkin issuing the executive order and commissioning the cleanup of the Virginia voter rolls. And they found thousands of people who shouldn't be there, many of which were dead or had moved. But there were also a number of non-citizens on the voter rolls. So he wanted to remove them because non-citizens aren't supposed to vote. The Justice Department, of course, sued him over this. And the district court and the appeals court sided with the government. Virginia appealed again to the U.S. Supreme Court, and it's a very different decision. CBS News, the Supreme Court on Wednesday allowed Virginia to move forward with its removal of roughly 1,600 alleged non-citizens from its voter rolls just days before the 2024 election. The High Court granted a request from state officials to pause a lower court order that blocked Virginia from continuing its systematic voter removal program that was launched in August, exactly 90 days before Election Day. A provision of the National Voter Registration Act requires states to complete programs aimed at purging ineligible voters from registration lists up to 90 days before federal elections. Youngkin says, though, that Democratic governors had done the same thing and finished within the 90 days, less than 90 days, and the courts were fine with that. 6-3 ruling from the Supreme Court, exactly as you'd expect it to break down. Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson voting against this decision. Virginia's been early voting for over a month now, so it's possible some of these people tried to vote or maybe already did. But the Supreme Court, common sense here. Non-citizens aren't supposed to vote. This isn't that hard.
Greg, I suppose I can give a molecule of credit to the Biden administration and the three Supreme Court justices who thought they were right, that they do believe in a principle. That principle is that within 90 days of an election, nobody should be taken off the voter rolls whatsoever. Doesn't matter if they're dead. Doesn't matter if they're not a citizen. Doesn't matter if they no longer live in the jurisdiction, moved out of state. No, it's totally not okay. You do it 91 days before an election, totally cool. 89 days? No, you're oppressing people. You're suppressing their legal right to vote, even if they're dead, even if they're not U.S. citizens, even if they moved out of the state or out of that jurisdiction. I think this is absolute common sense on the part of Virginia. I'm very relieved that they won at the Supreme Court. And I'll just point out, it's very hard to think of a scenario where you're on this list and the state of Virginia has just gone cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs and taken you off the voter rolls for no good reason whatsoever. But let's say you planned on moving out of the state. You told, state authorities you were moving. You filled out the change of address forms, all that kind of stuff. And then at the last second, they don't hire you to be the next head coach of the New York Jets. And you end up staying where you are. But you forgot that you'd filed all that. And you never filed in time to say, oh, actually, I'm not moving. And for that, you still get a provisional ballot. Right? Like there was always a remedy at work here. It is not, and by the other thing is we're dealing with what, 1,500 votes here?
Yeah, 1,600. Yeah,
1,600. Okay. First of all, let's point out Kamala Harris is going to win the state of Virginia. You and I wish it was otherwise. You and I wish that there were better options at least I wish there were better options on the ballot. But Virginia's been a pretty Democratic state. It's probably going to be closer than it's been in recent years. When Biden was on the ballot, Trump was actually looking competitive or even a little bit ahead here. But this is going to be a Kamala Harris state. So it's not like, Glenn Youngkin is doing this out of some sinister plot to deliver the state. He's doing it because he believes that the principle that your voter roll should have people who are A, citizens, B, living in the jurisdiction that they're supposed to be voting in, and C, not room temperature. Normal body temperature in the neighborhood of 98.6. And that's a really minimal state. Oh, and registered. That seems good. And Lord knows this state makes it easy for people to register. So this is the most remarkably easy, straightforward. It's not good. But these 1,600 people, three Supreme Court justices, no, you must let them vote even if they're dead, even if they're not living in the state or even if they're not U.S. citizens. So that seems like an absolutely bizarre. This is the one where you look at it, you're like, okay, Democrats feel better when people are voting in elections who should not vote in elections.
Yeah, very, very odd that they don't want simple, basic security operations in place to make sure that the people who are supposed to vote are the ones who vote. As the saying went down in Georgia on the Republican side of that debate, easy to vote, hard to cheat. But apparently that makes you Jim Crow 2.0 or Bull Connor or whatever else they tried to throw at you. But the early voting numbers from Georgia certainly belie that. I mean, the one correction I'd make to Youngkin is you might have wanted to start this a little sooner so you didn't have this issue over the 90 days. But it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. And so good on the Supreme Court for doing that. Also, Jim, just wanted to point out for anyone listening who wanted to correct you to Commonwealth, save your comments. We know Virginia is a Commonwealth.
Yes. This never comes up in Pennsylvania discussions, you know.
Some people are real sticklers on that. All right, Jim, on to our bad martini, which is probably the one everybody's waiting for today. So yesterday was supposed to be the big closing argument from Kamala Harris on the ellipse of the White House, the very same place where Donald Trump gave his speech on January 6th prior to folks heading over to the Capitol. And we all know what unfolded after that. And so she was kind of hearkening back to the convention with this unity speech. I'll be a president for all the people, which is kind of a hard pivot when you've been pulling the Nazi card on your opposition for the last several weeks.
I will unite all Americans, including the whole bunch of them that I call Nazis. You know, the only person who's really trying to unite minorities and Nazis together is running for governor of North Carolina. Allegedly.
So anyway, for some reason, while Kamala is doing this event out on the ellipse, Biden is on a Zoom interview. And so, of course, the issue of the Tony Hinchcliffe joke that was an awful thing to include at the Trump rally on Sunday about the Puerto Ricans comes up. And here is what Biden said in response to that is generating so much controversy.
And just the other day, a speaker at his rally called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. Well, let me tell you something. I don't know the Puerto Rican that I know, or Puerto Rico where I'm in my home state of Delaware. They're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization of seen as unconscionable.
And so, Jim, the response to this has been fascinating. First of all, over at CNN, they had a big panel about this, and they had this panelist named Franklin Leonard who chalked up Biden calling Trump supporters garbage to the stutter.
Joe Biden has never been a big arena speaker. He's never been the most fluid speaker. And by the way, as someone who had a stutter growing up, it's very obvious to me that there's an apostrophe at the end of supporters there. He was referring to the garbage spewed by supporters, not simply the supporters themselves.
Jim, you can hear apostrophes now. That's a new one for me.
Greg, I heard an umlaut, to extol that joke from Charlie Cook. Yeah, so I'm going to point out, I'm glad we played the audio because I certainly think Biden was talking about Trump's supporters as in the MAGA crowd, as in the group. But I suppose it's conceivable he's starting to say his supporters' comments, and he just didn't finish the sentence. I do think, by the way, that it's very believable that Biden, who has called for Trump to be locked up, which, by the way, when you run the Department of Justice, you probably shouldn't do that. In a corner post today, the number of times Biden has said he'd like to take Trump outside and, if this were high school, I'd take you out back and I'd show you, all that kind of stuff. This is all before his speech after Trump's first assassination attempt. Says something about our times. We need to specify which one. That Biden, urged us all to lower the temperature in our politics and to see each other as Americans and to not let our passions run away with ourselves, particularly towards the garbage people that he hates. That blatant contradiction there. Now, I will point out that for the Democrats, look, Joe Biden mangles his words and can't communicate clearly is really among the more plausible explanations they've ever tried to roll out in defense of this guy. Okay, yes, Biden does mangle his words together. But if Biden can't communicate anymore, well, then he really shouldn't be president anymore, right? I mean, if he's at the kind of point where he is so mentally in a state where he just has these outbursts. And this is not the first time we've seen him snap at someone or get really angry out of nowhere or something like that. Then he shouldn't be, still commander in chief. And that as much as we disagree with Kamala Harris, she should be handling the duties because she doesn't seem, I was going to say mentally addled, and I'm sure there's some listeners who disagree with that. So I'll just say she doesn't seem senile. She is only 60 years old. She's perfectly healthy as far as we know. An observation I made earlier this week. So this past weekend was the next to last weekend before Election Day. We did the coverage of the Harris campaign not wanting Biden out on the trail and constantly saying, we'll get back to you and all, on when we'll put you out there. Biden was at Joss A. Bank this past weekend in Wilmington, Delaware. Alone, apparently, browsing and just walking. He did not buy a suit. You'd think the president of the United States is good on suits. He seems to be wearing one every day. But maybe they're wearing out, or he wants a new style.
He's not going to need one in a couple months.
It's not a criticism of Joss A. Bank. I just kind of felt like it was this very revealing moment of his presidency. That with 14 or less days until the presidential election, instead of running for re-election, and he's not campaigning for Harris, he's not campaigning for any Senate Democrat or any Senate. He's got the weekend off, and he's walking around a Joss A. Bank alone. And in case you're wondering, he did not buy anything. So he was just browsing. And so I saw that. And I was just like, he's semi-retired already, isn't he? Nobody wants him. Nobody wants him out on the trail. And I just kind of feel like if that is the case, and if he comes out and says something and Democrats say, no, you missed the silent apostrophe in that sentence. And he, don't just ignore what he's saying. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, then he shouldn't be commander-in-chief. And we've been saying this for a while. And apparently in the new Woodward book, there's a new account of, donors who meet him and are terrified because he can't finish sentences and things like that. Like, it's everything we've said about this guy has proven to be true. Insert the Dennis Green gif here. And this is just further evidence of this. And it just seems very dramatically appropriate that a Democratic Party that was terrified to push him out of the nomination and that doesn't have the guts to invoke the 25th Amendment and to get him out of there is going to be hurt by Biden's runaway mouth in the final weeks of this election.
Yeah, first of all, I like Joseph A. Banks. I've bought multiple suits there. So, Biden's taste is suspect in that area as well. But in terms of the comments, it's obvious that he did get mangled when he says, I don't know the Puerto Rican that I know. Or a Puerto Rican from where I'm from.
Yeah, so, this kind of hinting that I'm as a Puerto Rican.
I grew up with the Puerto Rican community. He's probably been to mass with the Puerto Ricans more times than the Puerto Ricans, based on his other comments. But anyway, so that's tongue-tied. That's stuttering when he says the only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. And then he goes to a whole different sentence. His demonization of Latinos is unconscionable. So on and on it goes. So, but the media cleanup on aisle 46 here keeps going on because first of all, there was the apostrophe inserted by the transcription team at the White House in the official transcript of the remarks. Then Jonathan Lemire of MSNBC, and he's the White House correspondent for Politico, says the full Biden quote from the Zoom tonight, which is being taken out of context. And then you've got David Folkenflik over at NPR saying, having listened to this several times, I think you have an octogenarian with a stutter for whom clarity is an increasing challenge. I think that's true, but I'm not sure it's true in that sentence. He says precisely why Biden was eased from the race for re-election. Really don't sense he's calling Trump supporters garbage. Your mileage may vary. I don't think the mainstream media would be doing this kind of cleanup if it was Trump or a high-ranking Trump supporter. If that was happening.
Yeah. The degree to which they bend over backwards and will say, well, what he meant to say was such and such. And finally, Greg, I would never cast aspersion on your fashion sense, and your suits have always looked fine, but I usually wear Brooks Brothers. And I would just say, if you don't wear Brooks Brothers, how are you going to riot? Another deep cut that you only get on this kind of podcast. Half the listeners are like, wait, what? It's Florida 2000 recount. It's the Brooks Brothers riot.
You don't need a Brooks Brothers riot in Miami-Dade anymore. Republicans lead the county there. But anyway, yes, that was excellent pull from the 2000 recount.
The left keeps preaching for equality if Kamala is elected. But is this a dystopian America? The Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski. Every day, Chris helps unpack the connection between politics and the economy and how it affects your wallet. The idea that we're all supposed to end up in the exact same place, even after working much harder than they are, that's like a dystopian Kurt Vonnegut novel. Whether it's happening in D.C. or down on Wall Street, it's affecting you financially. Be informed. Check out the Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. And for this, hats off to your colleague Haley Strack over at National Review for flagging this ad, which I've seen play on Twitter, but I hadn't paid that close of attention to it. But it really is disturbing in a number of ways. It's directly calling for the election of Harris and Walz, but it's not from the Harris-Walz campaign. It's released by this outfit called Vote Common Good, and it's narrated by Julia Roberts. And it's easier to tell what's happening if you can see it, but there's enough narration here from Julia Roberts to explain what's happening. You've got these two couples headed to the polls. The husbands are all Trumpy, and it's obvious from their demeanor that they think they rule the roost in their house. They can tell their wives what to do. And so once the women finally get their chance to be in the polls, they lock eyes and decide to vote for Kamala without saying a word. And so here's the ad.
Your turn, honey.
In the one place in America where women still have a right to choose. You can vote any way you want. And no one will ever know.
Did you make the right choice?
Sure did, honey.
Remember, what happens in the booth stays in the booth. Vote Harris-Walz. Vote Common Good is responsible for the contents of this ad.
Vote Common Good is trying to foster divorce. But if that were the reality, that's what they'd be trying to do. In the real world, husbands and wives talk about these things. Some of the reasons why you actually marry each other is because you think similar ways about various things, including how you vote. Some couples don't. I also love the line in the beginning about it's the only place left for you to have choice in this country. I mean, the lies just keep coming and coming. But the efforts to pit women against men here, and that if you're a woman, it's almost your duty to do this, is just sick.
Yeah. So last night in her ellipse speech, Harris said something like 1/3 of American women live in a state where they don't have easy access to abortion. Well, that means 2/3 do, which pro-lifer is like, oh, that's the bad news. Like that's the, it's only 1/3 to be the perspective of this. But like, Americans don't have any, American women don't have any right to choose. So first of all, again, we're an audio podcast and we're trying to describe it to you. The guy's got a trucker hat with an American flag on it. Like, but they're pretty clear in their subtext visually and their iconography. I genuinely mean this, and like we can make fun of this ad, but if you are afraid to tell your husband who you voted for, you have much bigger problems than who's going to be president of the United States. And I think that's a sign of a deeply unhealthy relationship. I am in one of those relationships where we have different ideologies in our marriage. Although I'd point out that over time we're both getting a lot more cynical. So we're kind of veering, but just kind of observing that, like, the idea that you fear telling your spouse who you're voting for, you're afraid. This is a real insult to the interpolitical marriages of this country. It is also this insinuation that husbands are abusive, husbands are violent, husbands are dangerous and controlling and oppressive. And Greg, by the way, have you noticed, like, Democrats seem to have a problem with men voters? I can't imagine why. I just don't understand, It just seemed to come up out of nowhere. It's it must be sexism on the part of men. It couldn't possibly be that, But let's just observe. There's been a gender gap in politics for at least a generation. And there's, Newt Gingrich used to talk about how Republicans are the daddy party and Democrats are the mommy party. Tucker Carlson put his own twisted and disturbed twist on it recently. I'm not going to get into that too much, but the gist being that, like, yeah, men tend to vote Republican. You could chalk it up to perspective on defense and national security. You could chalk it up to male perspective on economics and the business world, and I believe greater faith in the free market, greater skepticism of government. Maybe some of it comes down to traditional values. I don't know. Again, also, as we emphasize on this show, when we talk about the gender gap, it's really a gender gap between single women and the rest of the electorate, because married women tend to vote Republican. Either it's very even, or even some Republican advantage there. So the great irony is that women who are in relationships with men tend to see the world more conservatively or more on the right side of the spectrum than women. And it's when a woman does not have a husband, and some might say a support network, a sense of someone who's there and who's said to have and to hold for the rest of our days, that puts her in a mindset like Julia, that poor woman with little orphan Annie eyes who never got any pupils. She was kind of like School on Sunday, no pupils. The idea that Julia was going to have her whole life taken care of, including a child, through the government, and there was never any boyfriend, fiance, husband figure who entered into her life, even though a child came along. That little diagram, that little infomercial put together by the Obama campaign said a lot about how the Democrats see the world, how they see relationships, how they see families. This message to women, men are optional. Can you imagine why men would then gravitate towards the Republican Party? Go figure. Now, in this election, we have seen this stark gender split. And oh, by the way, it's very much under young people. One of the things that's freaking out Democrats is that it used to be, well, young men at least would vote Democrat and be on the liberal side of the spectrum. And then this cycle, it does not seem to be the case. You see this aspersions of young people. They've all been seduced by the alt-right and incels and all these crazy right-wing onliners and stuff like that. Look, in the end, we all got to get along with each other. And generally, men love women. And generally, women love men. And like, you'd think that I'm very much a believer in this idea of the yin and the yang, right? If marrying somebody who was just like you, we would all be gay. We would all be marrying someone who is just like us in our gender, as well as all that kind of stuff. There's a reason men and women come together and they complement each other. They're different. One is not necessarily better than the other. Insert jokes about asking for directions here. But just this general sense that this is what we're supposed to be. This entire message from Democrats is you can't trust your husband. Your husband is a ticking time bomb. Your husband is this lurking threat that you're stuck with. And we will help you get out of this bad marriage. You just got to vote for Kamala Harris and it's all going to be better. Kamala Harris can't do a darn thing for you if that's the circumstance that you're in with your marriage. So, Julia Roberts. By the way, hey, Julia, you were with the with George Clooney did you notice anything about Biden at the time to kind of bring all of our martinis full circle today?
But remember, this was one of Hillary Clinton's litany of excuses for losing, along with Russia and Jim Comey and the Electoral College. It said women who were pressured by their husbands to vote for Donald Trump couldn't possibly be that women, particularly married women, don't like you and didn't agree with your opinions and positions on a number of issues. And I'll tell you, I don't know if Doris is married, but she's still getting nasty emails here. This one's from Barack Obama, allegedly. Doris, I'm asking you to send a gift to Vice President Harris immediately. Running out of time, getting a little nervous over there. But if your marriage is hanging by a thread because of who you're going to vote for here, you're going to need more help than the verdict on Election Day.
Yeah, but I just want to point out for all those husbands out there who are allegedly brainwashing their wives into voting for the candidate that they prefer, how are you doing it? Just email me. I'm kidding. Love my wife just the way she is. And then just secondly, marital advice from Hollywood stars. Okay. Just going to work out great. Lyle Lovett for the rebuttal. Honestly, but this ad and the Hillary excuse and all this stuff, it says a lot about how these people see the world. It's that it's not possible that a woman could possibly vote against the Democrats. She must be doing so under fear of her life from her abusive husband. That's the only way these people can conceive of a woman voting against a Democratic candidate.
It's exactly why you see the vitriol when there's a conservative female nominee or a conservative female politician or a black politician or, oh man, have a conservative female black politician. Oh my goodness. Then they absolutely lose their mind. So yeah, they pigeonhole you. You're this box, so therefore you should be over here. It makes them very, very frustrated when they
win some Sears. Brace yourself. You think it's ugly now?
Yes. Oh yeah. It's gonna be vicious. So anyway, Jim, good to be with you again today. See you tomorrow.
I'll see you tomorrow. One last thought, Greg. You know how I know my cell phone alter ego Diane? You know how I know she's not married?
How?
Because she's on the Democratic mailing list. Now all my married Democratic female friends are going to give me grief about it. I love you all, but however you want, it's a free country.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast. If you don't already, tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Wednesday. Join us again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.